Speak like the 1% elite. Master the words that move people. Elevate your communication. Transform your life.
You can tell within 30 seconds whether someone has power or whether they are borrowing it temporarily. It is not the suit. It is not the watch. It is not the expensive vocabulary. It is not even confidence. Real authority reveals itself through speech. The top 1% of executives, founders, investors, negotiators, and elite decision-makers communicate in a way that immediately changes the emotional temperature of a room. They do not rush. They do not over-explain. They do not seek permission to speak. Their words sound expensive because every sentence carries clarity, emotional control, and certainty. Most people spend their lives talking to survive socially. CEOs speak to direct reality. That is the difference. The average person enters conversations hoping to be accepted. Elite communicators enter conversations expecting to be respected. That subtle psychological distinction changes posture, tone, pacing, vocabulary, timing, and emotional energy. Most people destroy their own authority before the conversation even begins. They start speaking too quickly because they are nervous. They apologize before making a point. They fill silence because silence makes them uncomfortable. They add unnecessary details because they fear rejection. They seek approval after every statement. They talk emotionally instead of strategically. Without realizing it, they train the world to see them as low status. The brutal truth is that people do not respond to words first. They respond to perceived certainty. The human brain constantly evaluates who has emotional control in every interaction. This is why a calm sentence from a powerful person feels heavier than a loud speech from an insecure person. Elite communicators understand something most people never realize. Communication is not only language. Communication is psychological positioning. Every sentence either raises your perceived value or lowers it. Think about the rare individuals who walk into meetings and instantly command attention without trying. Nobody asks them to repeat themselves. Nobody interrupts them aggressively. Nobody dismisses their ideas casually. Why? Because they communicate from a frame of certainty instead of desperation. They are not trying to convince the room that they matter. They already assume they matter. The room unconsciously follows that assumption. This is why some people with average intelligence become leaders, while highly intelligent people remain ignored for decades. Intelligence without executive communication is invisible. You can have the best ideas in the world, but if your delivery sounds weak, uncertain, emotional, scattered, reactive, or approval-seeking, people will subconsciously distrust your competence. The corporate world pretends to reward merit alone, but reality rewards perception. Perception is heavily influenced by speech. The way elite people speak is not accidental. It is engineered through years of observing power dynamics. Powerful people understand that words create psychological frames. The person controlling the frame controls the conversation. Most people react emotionally inside conversations. CEOs direct conversations strategically. Most people speak to express themselves. Elite communicators speak to shape outcomes. Notice how high-level executives rarely waste words. Their language is compressed, direct, clean, and intentional. They remove emotional clutter. They speak in conclusions rather than endless explanations. Weak communicators talk in circles because they are afraid of judgment. Strong communicators move straight to the point because they are not seeking validation. A low-status speaker says, "I was kind of thinking maybe we could possibly try another strategy if everyone agrees." An elite communicator says, "We need a different strategy." The current approach is inefficient. Both sentences communicate a similar idea. but one sounds fragile while the other sounds authoritative. The difference is not intelligence. The difference is internal positioning. Most people unknowingly sabotage themselves through filler language. They say things like, I think, I feel like, just, kind of, sort of, maybe, probably, and hopefully, dozens of times per conversation. Every unnecessary softener weakens the perceived strength of the message. Elite communicators understand that excessive verbal cushioning communicates insecurity. This does not mean speaking arrogantly. Arrogance is loud insecurity wearing expensive clothes. True executive communication is calm, precise, emotionally controlled, and outcome-focused. Powerful people do not need to dominate every conversation. They dominate perception through emotional steadiness. One of the most important characteristics of elite speech is pace control. Weak communicators rush because they fear interruption, judgment, or silence. CEOs slow down because they expect attention. The person controlling the pace usually controls the interaction. Fast speech communicates anxiety. Measured speech communicates certainty. Think carefully about this. News anchors speak slowly. Lawyers speak slowly. Elite negotiators speak slowly. Billionaire founders speak slowly during interviews. Why? Because speed often signals emotional instability. Calm pacing signals control. Silence is another weapon used by elite communicators. Average people fear silence because silence exposes emotional discomfort. Powerful communicators use silence strategically. They pause after important statements. They pause before answering difficult questions. They allow tension to exist without rushing to fill it. Silence creates gravity. The average person treats conversation like a race. Elite communicators treat conversation like chess. Every word is placed intentionally. Another critical difference is emotional regulation. Most people allow emotions to hijack their speech patterns. They become reactive under pressure. Their voice changes during conflict. Their pacing becomes chaotic. Their words become defensive. Elite communicators maintain composure even when challenged aggressively. This emotional steadiness creates perceived authority. People trust calm individuals during uncertainty. In chaotic environments, the calmest person often becomes the psychological leader regardless of formal position. This is why emotional control is one of the most valuable communication assets in the world. Executive communication also depends heavily on decisiveness. Weak speakers constantly leave escape routes in their language because they fear being wrong. Elite communicators understand that leadership requires directional clarity. They make statements cleanly. They communicate decisions confidently. Even when uncertain internally, they project structured thinking externally. The world respects decisiveness because most people are psychologically exhausted by confusion. A person who communicates clearly becomes mentally attractive because clarity reduces cognitive stress. Another hidden trait of powerful speakers is observational intelligence. CEOs listen differently from average people. Most people listen emotionally. Elite communicators listen strategically. They pay attention to emotional patterns, insecurities, motivations, status dynamics, and hidden agendas. While average people focus only on words, elite communicators analyze behavior. The person who understands the emotional reality of a conversation gains invisible leverage. This is why top negotiators often speak less than everyone else in the room. Silence allows observation. Observation creates precision. One of the fastest ways to sound powerful is learning how to eliminate unnecessary emotional explanations. Weak communicators over-explain because they fear misunderstanding. Elite communicators trust their message. They do not emotionally chase acceptance. Imagine someone saying, "I'm so sorry, I know everyone is busy and maybe this is a stupid idea, but I just thought perhaps we could reconsider the timeline if that's okay." Compare that with, "The timeline needs adjustment. The current pace risks lower quality execution." The second statement sounds more competent because it removes emotional insecurity. People associate verbal clarity with intellectual clarity. Whether that assumption is fair does not matter. Perception shapes reality. Another executive trait is conversational direction. Average people let conversations drift randomly. Elite communicators subtly guide discussions toward objectives. They know the outcome they want before they begin speaking. Every sentence serves strategic movement. This is especially visible in negotiations. Weak negotiators emotionally react to pressure. Elite negotiators remain detached from emotional turbulence. They ask controlled questions. They slow the pace. They redirect attention. They maintain leverage through calmness. Questions themselves reveal status. Low-status individuals ask approval-seeking questions. High-status communicators ask clarifying or directional questions. Weak question: "Do you think my idea makes sense?" Strong question: "What obstacle do you see in implementation?" The first seeks validation. The second assumes value. One of the most dangerous habits in communication is unconscious submission language. Most people use it daily without realizing it. They shrink their own authority sentence by sentence. They begin statements with apologies. They soften every opinion. They seek emotional permission before expressing ideas. This is not humility. It is psychological conditioning. Elite communicators understand that if you constantly speak like someone beneath the room, eventually the room will believe you belong beneath it. Powerful people rarely apologize for existing. They apologize only when necessary. There is a massive difference between respect and self-minimization. Weak communicators confuse the two. They say things like, "Sorry to bother you," "Sorry if this sounds stupid," or "Sorry, just one quick thing." Every unnecessary apology quietly lowers perceived status. CEOs replace emotional submission with calm directness. Instead of saying, "Sorry to bother you," they say, "Do you have a minute?" Instead of saying, "Sorry if this is a bad idea," they say, "Here's another approach." Small shifts create enormous psychological differences. Another trait that separates elite communicators from average people is their relationship with tension. Most individuals panic when conversations become uncomfortable. They rush to reduce pressure. They laugh nervously. They over-explain. They immediately surrender their position to restore emotional comfort. But CEOs understand something critical. Leadership requires the ability to remain calm inside tension. Difficult conversations are where authority is either built or destroyed. Imagine a negotiation where one side becomes visibly emotional while the other remains calm. The calm side instantly gains psychological leverage. Emotional stability signals control. Emotional instability signals vulnerability. This is why elite executives train themselves to detach emotionally from temporary discomfort. They understand that pressure reveals hierarchy. There is also a hidden reason why elite speakers sound intelligent even when discussing simple ideas. Their speech is structured. Most people talk in chaotic streams of emotion. CEOs communicate in frameworks. Their minds organize information before speaking. Instead of rambling randomly, they communicate in sequences. Problem, cause, solution, priority, action, outcome. This structure creates the perception of clarity and competence. For example, an average employee might say, "Things have been getting kind of difficult lately because there are delays and people are confused and communication hasn't been very good." A CEO might say, "We have 3 problems right now: delayed execution, communication gaps, and unclear accountability." Same reality, completely different level of authority. Elite communication is not about sounding fancy. It is about reducing confusion. Powerful people know that confused communication creates weak leadership. Clarity creates trust. The human brain naturally follows individuals who simplify chaos. Another thing elite communicators avoid is emotional leakage. Emotional leakage happens when insecurity becomes visible through tone, pacing, facial reactions, or speech habits. Nervous laughter, constant smiling during serious conversations, talking too much, seeking reassurance after statements. These behaviors unconsciously communicate weakness. Most people do not understand that others respond more to emotional energy than actual words. You can say something intelligent while sounding uncertain, and people will distrust it. Another person can say something simple with certainty, and people will follow it immediately. Delivery shapes perceived intelligence. This is why vocal control matters enormously. CEOs understand how to use their voice strategically. They do not rush endings of sentences. They do not allow their voice to collapse under pressure. They speak from the chest rather than the throat. Their tone remains grounded even during disagreement. This creates vocal stability. Another important principle is strategic restraint. Weak communicators constantly feel the need to prove themselves. They interrupt. They overshare achievements. They dominate conversations unnecessarily. Elite communicators understand the psychology of scarcity. The less desperately you try to prove value, the more valuable you appear. Silence is part of executive presence. Powerful people are comfortable letting moments breathe. They are not afraid of pauses because they are not afraid of judgment. Average people speak continuously because silence makes them anxious. CEOs pause because pauses create gravity. Think about the most respected speakers you have ever seen. They do not sound rushed. They sound controlled. Every pause feels intentional. Every sentence lands with precision. They are not speaking emotionally. They are directing attention. Another hidden communication secret is detachment from approval. Most people speak based on how they hope others will react. This destroys authenticity and weakens authority. Elite communicators speak based on truth, clarity, and outcomes rather than emotional acceptance. This does not mean being rude. It means not emotionally collapsing when disagreement appears. CEOs understand that leadership often requires saying things people do not want to hear. Weak communicators avoid necessary truths to protect social comfort. Elite communicators prioritize reality over temporary approval. One of the strongest indicators of executive presence is brevity under pressure. Weak communicators become more emotional and wordy during stressful moments. Strong communicators become shorter and clearer. This is because emotional control compresses language. When an average person is challenged publicly, they often launch into defensive explanations. A CEO might simply say, "That assumption is incorrect." Short, controlled, final. Powerful communicators understand that over-defending yourself often signals insecurity. Another trait of elite speech is ownership language. Weak people linguistically escape responsibility. They say, "Mistakes were made," or "Things got delayed." CEOs use direct ownership. "We missed the target. Here's the correction plan." Ownership creates trust because it signals competence under pressure. People naturally follow individuals who appear capable of carrying responsibility. Accountability sounds powerful because responsibility itself is psychologically rare. Elite communicators are also masters of emotional framing. Framing determines how people interpret events. Average people describe situations emotionally. CEOs describe situations strategically. For example, during a crisis, a weak leader says, "We are in serious trouble." A strong leader says, "We are facing a difficult phase that requires disciplined execution." The second statement protects morale while preserving seriousness. Same reality, different psychological frame. This is why communication shapes organizational culture. The emotional tone of leadership language spreads through teams. Panic spreads, clarity spreads, confidence spreads, fear spreads. Words create emotional environments. Another principle elite communicators understand is conversational economy. They remove unnecessary complexity. Weak communicators often use 10 sentences where 2 would be enough. Powerful communicators value efficiency. They understand that concise speech reflects organized thinking. This becomes especially important during high-stakes conversations. Investors, executives, and decision-makers rarely have patience for endless explanations. The person who communicates clearly and quickly often gains the advantage. There is also a major difference between reacting and responding. Average people react instantly from emotion. CEOs respond after thinking. That pause between stimulus and response is where executive presence lives. Someone criticizes an average person and they immediately defend themselves emotionally. Someone criticizes a CEO and the CEO pauses, analyzes, and responds strategically. Emotional discipline changes perception completely. Another thing powerful people understand is the importance of certainty in sentence endings. Weak communicators often end statements with upward inflection, making everything sound like a question. This unconsciously communicates doubt. Elite communicators end sentences firmly and cleanly. Certainty does not mean aggression. It means stability. Calm certainty is more powerful than loud dominance. High-level communicators are also highly selective with emotional expression. They do not reveal every feeling immediately. They understand timing. They know when to show empathy, seriousness, urgency, optimism, or firmness. Emotional intelligence is not emotional suppression. It is emotional control. This becomes extremely important during leadership crises. Teams emotionally mirror leaders. If the leader sounds unstable, anxiety spreads through the organization. If the leader communicates calm direction, uncertainty becomes manageable. Another difference between average and elite communicators is conversational intention. Most people speak without knowing where they are leading the interaction. CEOs enter conversations with objectives. They know the outcome they want. Every question, pause, and statement serves movement toward that outcome. This is especially visible in negotiations. Weak negotiators emotionally chase agreement. Elite negotiators strategically create leverage. They ask questions more than they argue. They control pacing. They remain emotionally detached from temporary discomfort. One of the strongest signs of low-status communication is compulsive agreement. Many people agree automatically because they fear conflict or rejection. CEOs are willing to disagree calmly. They understand that respectful disagreement often signals independent thinking. Weak communicators either avoid disagreement entirely or become emotionally aggressive. Elite communicators disagree without emotional chaos. I understand the logic, but the data suggests another direction. Calm disagreement sounds powerful because it reflects emotional control. Another hidden principle is narrative simplicity. CEOs are often exceptional storytellers, but their stories are concise and purposeful. Weak storytellers wander endlessly without direction. Elite storytellers understand pacing, tension, and emotional relevance. Humans remember stories more than raw information. This is why powerful leaders use narrative strategically. They create emotional movement. They make complex ideas memorable. They communicate vision through stories people emotionally connect with. Another important distinction is confidence versus performance. Many people try to act confident, but forced confidence usually sounds artificial. Real executive communication comes from internal alignment. CEOs are not trying to look powerful every second. They are focused on clarity, direction, and outcomes. That focus naturally creates authority. This is why fake alpha behavior often fails. Loudness, constant dominance, forced deep voices, and aggressive energy are usually signs of insecurity. Real power rarely needs to announce itself. The strongest communicators in the room are often the calmest people there. One of the biggest mistakes people make is talking to fill space. Elite communicators speak to move conversations. Every sentence has purpose. They are not addicted to hearing themselves talk. They value impact more than volume. This is why executive presence feels different immediately. It is not theatrical. It is controlled energy. Calm certainty, structured thinking, emotional steadiness, precision under pressure. Most people spend years improving technical skills while ignoring communication entirely. Then they wonder why less talented individuals become leaders above them. The truth is uncomfortable. People promote those they trust psychologically. Speech heavily influences trust. When you communicate clearly under pressure, people assume competence. When you remain emotionally stable during conflict, people assume leadership capacity. When your words sound intentional instead of reactive, people subconsciously assign authority to you. Communication is reputation in real time. One of the biggest differences between average speakers and elite communicators is their relationship with attention. Most people desperately chase it. CEOs control it. The average person speaks constantly, hoping people will finally notice them. Powerful communicators understand that attention is not earned through noise. It is earned through presence. Presence is difficult to define, but everyone feels it instantly. It is the energy of someone who does not need validation from the room, someone who is mentally grounded, someone whose emotional state is not controlled by external reactions. That calm certainty creates magnetic attention naturally. This is why some people walk into meetings and immediately shift the atmosphere without saying much. Their silence alone carries weight because their energy communicates self-control. Meanwhile, insecure communicators speak endlessly, trying to manufacture importance. The more desperately someone tries to appear powerful, the weaker they usually appear. Another hidden trait of elite communicators is selective accessibility. Powerful people are warm, but not overly available emotionally. Weak communicators often become too familiar, too quickly, because they want acceptance. CEOs maintain subtle professional boundaries. This creates respect. Respect and likability are not the same thing. Many people sacrifice respect trying to be liked by everyone. Elite communicators understand that leadership sometimes requires emotional distance. You can be kind without becoming psychologically dependent on approval. Another important principle is emotional predictability. High-level leaders sound stable even under pressure. Their teams know what emotional energy to expect from them. This stability creates trust. Weak communicators become emotionally inconsistent. Calm one moment, reactive the next. friendly one day, hostile the next. Emotional unpredictability destroys authority because people stop feeling psychologically safe around you. The strongest leaders in the world are often emotionally steady, not emotionally dramatic. Calmness is a form of power because calmness communicates control over self. Another communication skill CEOs master is transition control. Average people abruptly jump between ideas. Elite communicators guide listeners smoothly from one thought to another. Their speech feels organized. This creates mental comfort for the audience. For example, instead of rambling emotionally, a CEO might say, "There are two issues we need to solve first, the operational issue and the communication issue." Immediately, the conversation feels structured. Humans naturally trust structure because structure reduces uncertainty. Powerful communicators also understand the importance of timing. Timing changes the emotional effect of words completely. A sentence delivered too early loses impact. A sentence delivered too late loses relevance. Elite communicators instinctively understand conversational rhythm. This is especially visible during negotiations and interviews. Weak communicators rush to fill silence. CEOs wait. They allow the other side to speak more. They understand that patience creates informational advantage. People reveal enormous amounts about themselves when given silence. Another major difference is reaction management. Most people react emotionally to disrespect, disagreement, or pressure. CEOs respond strategically instead of impulsively. This ability changes professional trajectories completely. Imagine someone challenges an executive aggressively during a meeting. A weak communicator becomes defensive immediately. Their tone changes, their pacing speeds up, their emotions become visible. An elite communicator remains composed and says, "Walk me through your concern." That calm response instantly shifts the power dynamic. Emotional discipline is persuasive because people trust stability more than intensity. Another hidden rule of executive communication is avoiding emotional clutter. Weak communicators attach unnecessary emotion to everything. Every inconvenience becomes dramatic. Every disagreement becomes personal. CEOs separate emotion from analysis. They focus on decisions instead of emotional reactions. This does not mean they lack feelings. It means they do not allow feelings to control delivery. One of the most powerful habits you can develop is learning how to speak in conclusions rather than emotional processing. Average people often think out loud in chaotic ways. CEOs process internally and communicate clearly afterward. For example, instead of saying, "I don't know, maybe we could possibly try something different because this situation feels difficult," a CEO says, "The current model is inefficient. We need another approach." One sounds emotionally scattered. The other sounds decisive. Another trait elite communicators possess is comfort with brevity. Weak communicators fear short answers because they worry silence makes them seem unintelligent. Powerful people understand that concise speech often sounds more intelligent than endless explanation. Think about how experienced executives answer questions during interviews. They rarely ramble. Their answers feel controlled, clean, and intentional. This is not accidental. They understand that authority depends heavily on verbal discipline. Another hidden communication principle is removing emotional dependency from persuasion. Weak communicators desperately need others to agree with them. CEOs focus on presenting information clearly and strategically. They are emotionally detached from immediate validation. This detachment creates confidence. Desperation weakens persuasion because people unconsciously sense emotional neediness. calm conviction feels stronger than emotional pleading. Another reason elite communicators sound powerful is because they avoid over-defending themselves. The average person tries to explain every detail after criticism. CEOs answer directly and move forward. Over-explanation often signals insecurity because it communicates fear of judgment. Calm brevity communicates confidence. This becomes especially important in leadership. Teams subconsciously study how leaders handle pressure. If a leader becomes emotionally reactive under criticism, trust decreases. If the leader remains composed, trust increases. Another thing elite speakers understand is vocal energy control. Powerful communication is not monotone, but it is controlled. CEOs know when to lower intensity and when to raise it. They understand emotional contrast. If someone speaks with maximum intensity all the time, their words lose impact. Elite communicators create emphasis strategically. They slow down during important points. They lower their voice before critical statements. They use rhythm intentionally. Humans respond emotionally to vocal patterns more than logical content alone. This is why some speakers feel compelling even when discussing ordinary subjects. Another critical trait is conversational leadership. Weak communicators wait for permission to guide discussions. CEOs naturally direct conversations toward priorities, decisions, and outcomes. If a meeting becomes chaotic, the executive often says something simple like, "Let's simplify this," or "Let's focus on the core issue first." Immediately, the room regains structure. Leadership communication reduces confusion. One of the strongest indicators of executive presence is emotional non-reactivity to status pressure. Most people unconsciously shrink around authority figures. Their voice changes. Their confidence disappears. Their speech becomes overly careful. CEOs maintain relatively consistent communication regardless of who is in the room. They do not become submissive around powerful people or arrogant around weaker individuals. This consistency signals internal stability. Another powerful principle is controlled disagreement. Elite communicators do not fear disagreement because they understand that tension is part of intelligent discussion. Weak communicators either avoid disagreement entirely or become emotionally aggressive. Strong communicators disagree calmly and precisely. "I understand your point, but the numbers indicate another direction." That sentence maintains respect while protecting authority. People trust individuals who can handle disagreement without emotional chaos. Another hidden trait of elite speakers is outcome orientation. Average people often focus conversations on feelings, blame, and emotional reactions. CEOs redirect discussions toward action, solutions, and movement. When problems arise, weak communicators ask, "Whose fault is this?" Elite communicators ask, "What is the correction plan?" One focuses on emotional release. The other focuses on operational progress. This difference becomes massive over time. Organizations built around blame become stagnant. Organizations built around solutions move faster. Another communication principle CEOs understand is the importance of verbal certainty during uncertainty. Even when situations are difficult, leaders must communicate direction clearly. Uncertainty without guidance creates panic. This does not mean pretending everything is perfect. Elite communicators balance honesty with stability. The situation is challenging, but we have a clear next step. That type of language creates psychological reassurance. Another thing powerful communicators avoid is excessive emotional storytelling about themselves. Weak communicators often make conversations self-centered because they unconsciously seek validation. CEOs focus more on relevance than emotional attention. When elite communicators tell stories, the stories usually serve a purpose: to teach, to persuade, to inspire, to simplify, not merely to receive sympathy or approval. Another major distinction is confidence in pauses. Average people fear silence because silence feels socially dangerous. CEOs understand that silence creates authority. A pause after an important sentence allows the words to land emotionally. Fast speech often sounds nervous. Measured pauses sound deliberate. This is why elite speakers rarely sound rushed, even during difficult discussions. Their pacing communicates emotional control. Their calmness affects the emotional state of everyone listening. Another critical principle is conversational detachment from ego. Weak communicators often defend their identity instead of discussing ideas objectively. CEOs separate themselves emotionally from temporary disagreement. This allows them to think clearly under pressure. Ego-driven communication creates emotional blindness. Strategic communication requires psychological distance. Another hidden communication advantage is curiosity without submissiveness. Elite communicators ask intelligent questions, but their questions do not sound approval-seeking. They ask questions to gather information, uncover leverage, and direct conversations. For example, instead of saying, "Do you think my idea is okay?" they ask, "What obstacle do you see in implementation?" One sounds dependent, the other sounds strategic. Questions reveal psychology. Strong questions reveal leadership thinking. Another thing powerful communicators understand is the value of emotional containment. They do not immediately reveal frustration, fear, insecurity, or anger impulsively. Emotional leakage weakens authority because it exposes internal instability. The elite understand that leadership is partially emotional management. Teams absorb the emotional state of leaders unconsciously. Calm leaders create calm organizations. Reactive leaders create unstable environments. One of the reasons executive communication feels so different is because it combines emotional control with directional clarity. Most people communicate from emotional impulse. CEOs communicate from strategic intention. That is why their words feel heavier, more precise, more memorable. Because true authority is not volume. It is emotional control under pressure. Most people think charisma is something you are born with. They imagine that elite communicators naturally possess magnetic personalities that ordinary people can never develop. That belief is false. What most people call charisma is usually emotional certainty, combined with social calibration. CEOs are not powerful because they speak perfectly. They are powerful because they speak without internal collapse. The average person constantly monitors reactions while speaking. They analyze faces. They fear judgment. They adjust themselves every few seconds, trying to maintain approval. This destroys natural authority because their attention becomes divided. Half of their mind focuses on communication, while the other half desperately searches for acceptance. Elite communicators do the opposite. They focus outward instead of inward. Their attention stays on the conversation, the objective, and the environment, rather than obsessing over how they are being perceived. Ironically, this lack of approval-seeking makes them appear more confident. One of the fastest ways to sound powerful is to stop emotionally chasing reactions. Say what needs to be said clearly, then allow silence. Weak communicators immediately panic after speaking. They start adding explanations, jokes, disclaimers, and emotional cushioning because they fear negative interpretation. CEOs trust their words enough to let them stand alone. Another hidden principle is the relationship between fear and speed. Nervous people speak quickly because their body wants to escape tension. Powerful communicators slow down because they are comfortable occupying space psychologically. When you slow your speech intentionally, people subconsciously assume you expect attention. Calm pacing communicates status because it signals emotional security. This is why elite interviews sound different from ordinary conversations. High-level leaders rarely sound hurried. Even under pressure, their speech feels measured, controlled, stable. Another communication mistake most people make is trying too hard to sound intelligent. They use complicated vocabulary, endless details, and excessive technical language, hoping others will see them as smart. But elite communicators understand that simplicity is persuasive. The highest-level thinkers often explain complex ideas in the simplest ways. Complexity without clarity creates confusion. Clarity creates trust. A weak communicator says, "We are currently experiencing a multifactorial operational inefficiency stemming from interdepartmental misalignment." A CEO says, "Our teams are not aligned and execution is slowing down." The second statement sounds stronger because it is easier to understand immediately. Powerful communication is not about sounding intellectual. It is about creating clarity fast. Another trait elite communicators possess is emotional consistency across environments. Weak communicators change personality based on status dynamics. They become submissive around authority and dominant around weaker people. CEOs maintain relatively stable behavior regardless of who they are speaking with. This stability creates trust because it signals self-possession. People unconsciously respect individuals whose identity does not collapse under pressure. Another hidden principle is conversational framing during conflict. Average people emotionally defend themselves. Elite communicators redirect attention toward facts, outcomes, and direction. Imagine someone aggressively criticizes a leader in front of a team. A weak communicator reacts emotionally. "That's unfair. You don't understand how hard this has been." An elite communicator responds calmly. "Let's focus on solving the issue." Immediately, the emotional frame changes. Leadership communication is often less about winning arguments and more about controlling emotional direction. Another critical difference is that CEOs do not communicate from insecurity. Most people speak from hidden fear. Fear of rejection, fear of embarrassment, fear of looking unintelligent, fear of conflict. Those fears leak through tone, pacing, and body language. Elite communicators are not fearless. They simply do not allow fear to control delivery. This is why executive presence feels calm. It is not the absence of pressure. It is emotional stability inside pressure. Another communication advantage elite speakers possess is selective emotional expression. Weak communicators reveal every emotion immediately. Frustration appears instantly. Anxiety appears instantly. Anger appears instantly. CEOs regulate emotional display strategically. They know that uncontrolled emotion weakens clarity. This becomes especially important during negotiations. The first person who loses emotional control often loses leverage. Calmness protects power. Another hidden communication skill is verbal decisiveness. Weak communicators constantly soften their statements because they fear responsibility. Maybe, kind of, possibly, I think, and hopefully dominate their speech. Elite communicators remove unnecessary uncertainty from language. They speak in clean conclusions. Instead of saying, "I think we should maybe reconsider the plan," they say, "The plan needs adjustment." One sounds hesitant. The other sounds decisive. People follow clarity faster than hesitation. Another thing powerful speakers understand is how to create psychological contrast. If every sentence sounds emotionally identical, listeners lose attention. Elite communicators vary rhythm intentionally. Sometimes they slow down dramatically before an important point. Sometimes they use very short sentences for emphasis. Sometimes they allow silence to create tension. This variation keeps attention alive. Great communication is not robotic. It has rhythm. This matters enormously in long-form speaking, interviews, presentations, and leadership meetings. Monotone delivery kills attention regardless of intelligence. Another critical principle is emotional detachment from temporary disagreement. Weak communicators take disagreement personally. CEOs treat disagreement as information. This allows them to stay logical under pressure. Emotional defensiveness clouds thinking. Strategic detachment preserves clarity. Powerful communicators also avoid unnecessary emotional intensity. Many people mistakenly believe passion alone creates influence, but uncontrolled intensity often reduces credibility. The strongest communicators balance emotion with stability. They know when to increase intensity and when to remain calm. This control creates impact. Another hidden trait of elite communicators is conversational patience. Weak communicators rush outcomes because they fear uncertainty. CEOs understand that pressure often causes others to reveal valuable information. Patience creates leverage. This is why skilled negotiators often remain silent after making important points. Silence pressures the other side psychologically. Most people become uncomfortable and start talking unnecessarily. The person most comfortable with silence usually controls the interaction. Another major difference is how elite communicators handle mistakes. Weak communicators become defensive immediately. CEOs acknowledge errors directly and move toward correction. We missed the target. Here's the adjustment. Short. Responsible. Stable. This creates trust because accountability signals competence. Defensive communication signals insecurity. Another powerful principle is emotional neutrality during criticism. Weak communicators emotionally absorb criticism instantly. CEOs evaluate criticism analytically first. Is the criticism useful? Is it emotional noise? Is there actionable information? This mental separation prevents emotional hijacking. One of the reasons elite leaders appear mentally strong is because they do not emotionally react to every stimulus immediately. Another communication habit that destroys authority is excessive self-deprecation. Many people use self-minimizing humor constantly because they think it makes them likable. Sometimes it does temporarily, but chronic self-minimization trains others to unconsciously lower your perceived competence. Elite communicators can be humorous without reducing their own authority constantly. Another hidden trait is linguistic precision. Powerful communicators choose words carefully. They avoid emotionally exaggerated language unless necessary. Weak communicators often overdramatize everything. Every setback becomes a disaster. Every inconvenience becomes chaos. CEOs maintain proportional communication. Controlled language creates emotional stability. Another critical difference is conversational ownership. Weak communicators allow discussions to drift emotionally and directionlessly. CEOs guide conversations intentionally. If meetings become chaotic, they simplify the discussion. If conversations become emotional, they redirect towards solutions. If teams lose focus, they restore priorities. Leadership communication is directional. Another reason elite communicators sound powerful is because they avoid compulsive explaining. Weak communicators believe more words create more persuasion. Often the opposite is true. Over-explanation weakens authority because it signals emotional uncertainty. A calm, direct sentence usually sounds stronger than a 5-minute emotional defense. Another communication principle CEOs understand is psychological independence. They do not emotionally collapse when others disagree with them. Their self-worth is not dependent on universal approval. This independence creates calmness. People who desperately need acceptance cannot communicate with executive presence because fear constantly interrupts their delivery. Another hidden factor behind elite communication is emotional resilience. Leaders hear criticism constantly. They face pressure constantly. They experience uncertainty constantly. If every negative reaction emotionally destabilized them, they could not function effectively. Executive communication is deeply connected to nervous system control. The calmer your nervous system becomes under pressure, the more powerful your communication sounds. Another thing powerful communicators understand is the importance of ending conversations strongly. Weak communicators often fade out awkwardly or continue speaking long after the point has landed. CEOs end discussions clearly. That's the direction. Let's move forward. We'll review results next week. Strong endings create psychological closure. Another major distinction is the relationship between confidence and emotional neediness. Weak communicators often speak from hidden desperation. They want validation, reassurance, recognition, or approval. Elite communicators focus on contribution, clarity, and execution instead. This creates grounded confidence because their communication is not emotionally dependent on immediate reactions. Another trait of executive speakers is the ability to stay composed during uncertainty. Average people panic when answers are unclear. CEOs tolerate ambiguity better. Instead of emotionally reacting, they say things like, "We don't have complete information yet, but here's the next step." That type of language creates stability during chaos. People trust leaders who remain calm when certainty disappears. Another communication secret most people never realize is this: authority is emotional, not intellectual. People decide whether to trust your leadership largely based on how emotionally stable you appear under pressure. That is why calmness feels powerful. That is why clarity feels expensive. That is why silence feels dangerous. And that is why elite communicators sound different from everyone else in the room. There is a moment in every high-level conversation where invisible hierarchy becomes obvious. It usually happens during pressure, a disagreement, an interruption, a difficult question, an unexpected problem. That moment reveals who is emotionally grounded and who is psychologically fragile. Most people lose authority in those moments because their nervous system takes control of their speech. Their breathing changes. Their tone becomes defensive. Their pacing speeds up. Their words lose structure. Elite communicators remain composed. This is why executive presence is not really about sounding impressive during easy conversations. Real authority appears during tension. Anyone can sound confident when everything is comfortable. CEOs sound controlled when the environment becomes uncertain. One of the strongest communication advantages in the world is the ability to think clearly while emotionally pressured. Most people cannot do it. Their emotions hijack cognition. The elite train themselves to separate emotional turbulence from verbal delivery. That separation creates power. Another hidden reason CEOs sound persuasive is because they communicate from assumptions rather than permission. Weak communicators ask for space psychologically before speaking. Their tone unconsciously says, "I hope this idea is acceptable." Elite communicators speak from the assumption that their contribution already has value. This assumption changes everything. A weak communicator says, "I don't know if this makes sense, but maybe we should reconsider." A CEO says, "We need to reconsider the strategy." Same thought. Completely different psychological impact. The human brain responds strongly to certainty because certainty reduces mental friction. This is why clear speakers naturally attract influence. Another important distinction is emotional weight. Powerful communicators do not react to everything equally. Weak communicators emotionally fluctuate constantly. Tiny inconveniences create visible frustration. Minor criticism creates insecurity. Small problems create panic. CEOs conserve emotional intensity for situations that actually require it. This emotional discipline creates credibility. When a calm person suddenly becomes serious, people pay attention immediately because emotional escalation feels meaningful rather than habitual. Another principle elite communicators understand is conversational leverage. Most people give away leverage unconsciously through oversharing, over-explaining, emotional reactions, and desperation. The elite remain measured. They reveal information strategically. They do not emotionally chase outcomes. They understand that whoever needs the interaction less often controls the interaction more. This is extremely visible during negotiations. Weak negotiators rush to agreement because silence feels uncomfortable. Strong negotiators stay calm inside uncertainty. They allow pressure to exist without emotionally collapsing. Patience creates leverage. Another hidden communication skill is emotional redirection. Average people become trapped inside emotional conversations. CEOs redirect conversations toward productive movement. Imagine a team meeting where frustration starts spreading emotionally. Weak leaders absorb the frustration and amplify it. Strong leaders acknowledge the issue briefly and redirect focus toward action. Yes, the situation is difficult. Here's what we're doing next. That sentence changes emotional direction immediately. Leadership communication is emotional steering. Another reason elite communicators sound authoritative is because they understand the psychology of certainty under ambiguity. Most people panic when situations become unclear. CEOs tolerate incomplete information better than average individuals. They do not pretend certainty exists when it does not. Instead, they communicate structured direction despite uncertainty. We don't have all the answers yet, but here are the next priorities. That type of language creates stability because it combines realism with leadership. Another major difference is how powerful people handle interruptions. Weak communicators immediately surrender conversational control when interrupted. CEOs often maintain calm continuity. They do not become emotionally reactive. They do not rush defensively. They calmly reclaim space. Let me finish this point. Simple, direct, controlled. Most people are too psychologically uncomfortable to say that confidently. Another hidden trait of executive communication is emotional containment during success. Weak communicators often become emotionally excessive when praised or validated. CEOs remain relatively grounded. This stability creates consistency. Extreme emotional dependence on praise weakens authority because it reveals psychological neediness. The strongest communicators remain centered whether they receive criticism or compliments. Another principle elite speakers understand is strategic repetition. Average people repeat themselves because they are nervous. CEOs repeat intentionally for emphasis. There is a major difference. Weak repetition sounds uncertain. Strategic repetition sounds authoritative. Great leaders often repeat core ideas deliberately because repetition increases retention and emotional impact. Another communication mistake most people make is confusing friendliness with weakness. Elite communicators are often warm, respectful, and emotionally intelligent, but their warmth exists alongside boundaries. They do not become emotionally submissive to maintain harmony. This balance is rare. Most people lean too far in one direction, either overly soft or unnecessarily aggressive. CEOs balance warmth and firmness simultaneously. Another hidden reason elite communicators influence rooms is because they create emotional safety during uncertainty. Calm leadership reduces panic. When people sense emotional stability from a leader, their nervous system relaxes. This increases trust automatically. That is why emotionally reactive leaders create unstable environments. Teams unconsciously mirror leadership behavior. Communication spreads emotional states. Another powerful principle is decisiveness without rigidity. Weak communicators either sound uncertain or stubborn. CEOs communicate confidence while remaining adaptable. Based on current data, this is the right direction. That sentence communicates decisiveness without ego attachment. Powerful communicators understand that certainty should come from structured thinking, not emotional stubbornness. Another trait elite communicators possess is strategic listening. Most people listen only long enough to respond emotionally. CEOs listen to understand motivations, insecurities, priorities, and leverage points. Listening is not passive. Listening is intelligence gathering. This is why elite negotiators often speak less than expected. Silence allows observation. Observation creates precision. Another hidden communication principle is avoiding unnecessary emotional escalation. Weak communicators often increase emotional intensity too quickly during disagreement. CEOs regulate escalation carefully. They understand that once emotional chaos enters a conversation, clarity usually disappears. This is why elite communicators maintain calm tones even during serious discussions. Emotional steadiness protects decision quality. Another reason powerful people sound different is because they remove emotional clutter from language. Weak communicators overload conversations with emotional disclaimers, filler words, and unnecessary explanations. CEOs simplify. The project is delayed. We need another strategy. The numbers are declining. We need faster execution. Clear, direct, structured. The elite understand that simplicity feels powerful because simplicity reflects cognitive organization. Another communication advantage CEOs possess is identity stability. Weak communicators emotionally shape-shift depending on the audience. They become different people around different status levels. Elite communicators remain relatively consistent. This consistency creates trust because people feel they are interacting with someone real rather than someone performing constantly. Another hidden principle is emotional neutrality toward temporary rejection. Most people fear rejection so intensely that it controls their communication. They soften every opinion. They avoid directness. They emotionally retreat under disagreement. CEOs understand that leadership naturally creates disagreement. They are willing to tolerate temporary discomfort to preserve clarity. Another powerful communication habit is solution orientation. Weak communicators dwell emotionally on problems. CEOs move conversations towards solutions quickly. This changes organizational culture dramatically. People trust individuals who create movement instead of emotional stagnation. Another reason executive communication feels expensive is because elite speakers avoid verbal chaos. Their speech patterns feel organized, prioritized, structured. Average people often communicate in emotional spirals. CEOs communicate in frameworks. There are 3 priorities. The core issue is execution. The main risk is timing. This structure creates authority because structure signals control. Another hidden communication skill is pressure management through voice control. Most people unconsciously allow pressure to change their tone dramatically. Their voice becomes shaky, rushed, defensive, or unstable. Elite communicators regulate vocal delivery consciously. Their tone remains relatively grounded under stress. This creates perceived leadership capacity instantly. Another major difference is emotional independence from outcomes. Weak communicators become desperate because they emotionally attach themselves to immediate results. CEOs focus on execution rather than emotional obsession over outcomes. This detachment creates calmness. Desperation weakens authority because desperation leaks psychologically through speech. Another trait of elite communicators is controlled vulnerability. Weak communicators either overshare emotionally or suppress emotions completely. CEOs understand balance. They can acknowledge difficulty without collapsing emotionally. This has been challenging, but we're adapting. That sentence communicates humanity without losing authority. Another communication principle powerful people understand is that emotional reactions are contagious. If leaders panic publicly, organizations panic privately. If leaders remain calm publicly, teams become more resilient psychologically. This is why executive communication matters far beyond words. It shapes emotional environments. Another hidden factor behind executive presence is comfort with responsibility. Weak communicators fear responsibility because responsibility creates pressure. CEOs communicate like individuals accustomed to carrying pressure. That psychological comfort changes tone completely. Another reason elite communicators command attention is because they speak with internal alignment. Their words, tone, pacing, and emotional energy match each other. Weak communicators often sound fragmented because their internal emotions conflict with their external words. Alignment creates authenticity, and authenticity creates trust. Most people spend their lives trying to sound impressive. Elite communicators focus on sounding clear, calm, and certain. That is why they influence rooms before they even finish their first sentence. The modern world rewards people who can communicate under pressure. Not people who memorize the most information. Not people who speak the loudest. Not people who dominate every conversation aggressively. The real advantage belongs to individuals who remain calm while others become emotional, clear while others become confused, and decisive while others hesitate. That is the true language of the elite. Most people think executive communication begins with vocabulary. In reality, it begins with emotional self-control. Your nervous system speaks before your words do. People hear tension in your breathing. They hear insecurity in rushed pacing. They hear fear in defensive explanations. Long before anyone consciously evaluates your intelligence, their subconscious evaluates your emotional stability. This is why 2 people can say almost identical sentences while creating completely different reactions. One person sounds grounded. The other sounds uncertain. One sounds like leadership. The other sounds like hesitation. The difference is internal state. Elite communicators understand that speech is emotional transmission. Words carry emotional energy. Calm words from a grounded person feel powerful. Intelligent words from an anxious person lose force. This is why executive presence cannot be fully faked. Techniques help, but eventually, communication reflects identity. The goal is not to perform confidence artificially. The goal is to develop internal stability so deeply that confidence becomes natural. Another reason CEOs sound different is because they think in priorities instead of emotional noise. Average people often become overwhelmed because every problem feels equally urgent emotionally. Elite communicators organize chaos immediately. What matters most right now? What is the core issue? What is the next step? Those questions simplify complexity. The elite understand that confused communication usually reflects confused thinking. Clear communication reflects mental structure. Another hidden trait of powerful speakers is emotional endurance. Weak communicators mentally collapse after pressure, criticism, or setbacks. CEOs continue functioning calmly even when conditions become difficult. This emotional endurance creates reliability. People trust individuals who remain psychologically stable during uncertainty. Another communication mistake most people make is talking before thinking. Their mouth moves faster than their mind. CEOs reverse that process. They think first, then speak with precision. This is why elite communicators rarely sound impulsive. Their words feel intentional because they are intentional. Another principle executives understand is that confidence is often subtraction, not addition. Most people try to add confidence artificially through louder voices, exaggerated body language, or complicated vocabulary. But elite communication usually involves removing weakness rather than adding performance. Remove filler words. Remove unnecessary apologies. Remove emotional over-explaining. Remove nervous pacing. Remove compulsive approval-seeking. What remains sounds naturally stronger. Another hidden communication advantage is comfort with simplicity. Weak communicators often fear sounding simple because they associate simplicity with low intelligence. CEOs understand the opposite. Simplicity requires clarity of thought. Anyone can make ideas sound complicated. Very few people can make complicated ideas sound simple. That ability creates influence. Another major distinction is emotional recovery speed. Weak communicators remain emotionally trapped after negative interactions. CEOs recover faster. A difficult meeting happens. Criticism appears. Pressure increases. Weak communicators emotionally carry that energy into every conversation afterward. Elite communicators reset quickly. This ability protects clarity under pressure. Another hidden principle is that authority grows when emotional reactions shrink. The more emotionally reactive someone becomes, the less psychologically powerful they usually appear. This is why calmness feels dominant. People unconsciously associate emotional control with competence. Another trait of executive communication is strategic optimism. Weak communicators either become overly negative or unrealistically positive. CEOs balance realism with direction. This is difficult, but manageable. We have challenges, but we also have options. The situation is serious, but we know the next move. That balance creates trust because it avoids both panic and denial. Another communication skill powerful people master is handling difficult questions without emotional collapse. Weak communicators become defensive instantly. CEOs remain composed. Instead of reacting emotionally, they slow down mentally. That's a fair question. Here's the important context. Let's look at the numbers first. These responses create stability. Another hidden communication principle is protecting credibility through consistency. Weak communicators constantly contradict themselves emotionally. One day, confident. Next day, uncertain. One moment decisive, next moment reactive. Elite communicators maintain stable behavioral patterns. This consistency creates psychological reliability. Another reason CEOs sound persuasive is because they avoid emotional excess. They do not oversell constantly. They do not force intensity unnecessarily. They understand that calm conviction often sounds stronger than aggressive persuasion. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most respected. Real authority rarely needs theatrical energy. Another communication mistake average people make is attaching ego to being right. CEOs focus more on finding correct solutions than protecting identity. This creates intellectual flexibility. When strong leaders receive better information, they adjust direction without emotional drama. Ego-driven communication destroys adaptability. Another hidden advantage of elite communicators is their relationship with silence. Most people fear silence because silence exposes emotional discomfort. CEOs use silence strategically. A pause before answering creates thoughtfulness. A pause after a statement creates emphasis. A pause during negotiation creates pressure. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is control. Another reason executive communication feels powerful is because elite speakers understand emotional timing. They know when to push harder, when to soften, when to pause, and when to redirect. Social intelligence shapes influence. Weak communicators treat every interaction with the same emotional energy. CEOs calibrate dynamically. Another trait of powerful speakers is their ability to reduce emotional chaos during conflict. Weak communicators amplify emotional tension. CEOs absorb tension and redirect conversations toward clarity. Let's focus on facts. What's the actual issue? What outcome are we aiming for? These questions pull discussions out of emotional confusion. Another hidden communication principle is avoiding unnecessary defensiveness. Defensiveness signals insecurity because it reveals emotional fragility. Powerful communicators can hear criticism without immediately collapsing psychologically. They evaluate first, then respond calmly. This emotional separation creates authority. Another difference between average and elite communicators is how they handle uncertainty publicly. Weak communicators either panic or pretend certainty exists when it does not. CEOs communicate direction honestly, without emotional instability. We don't know everything yet, but here's our next step. That sentence creates reassurance because it combines realism with leadership. Another powerful communication habit is concise correction. Weak communicators overreact emotionally to misunderstandings. CEOs correct calmly. That's not accurate. Let me clarify. That's not the direction we're taking. Short, stable, clean. Another reason executive communication commands attention is because elite speakers sound mentally organized. Their thoughts move in structure rather than emotional randomness. Humans naturally trust organized minds because organization signals competence. Another hidden principle is emotional self-sufficiency. Weak communicators constantly seek reassurance indirectly through conversation. CEOs generate stability internally. This creates grounded confidence because their communication is not emotionally dependent on approval. Another trait elite communicators possess is pressure tolerance during visibility. Most people become psychologically unstable when attention increases. CEOs remain functional under scrutiny. This matters enormously in leadership because visibility creates pressure automatically. Another communication advantage powerful people have is narrative control. Weak communicators allow circumstances to emotionally define conversations. CEOs frame situations strategically. A weak leader says, "Everything is falling apart." A strong leader says, "We are restructuring under pressure." Same reality, different emotional frame. Framing shapes perception. Perception shapes morale. Morale shapes execution. Another reason elite speakers influence people deeply is because they create emotional certainty during instability. Humans crave psychological direction during chaos. The person who communicates calm clarity often becomes the emotional center of the room. That is leadership. Another hidden principle behind executive presence is the ability to separate temporary emotions from permanent decisions. Weak communicators make emotionally reactive statements they later regret. CEOs slow down before speaking during emotional moments. That pause protects judgment. Another communication trait powerful people possess is respect without submission. Weak communicators become overly agreeable around authority figures. CEOs remain respectful while protecting their own presence. This balance signals self-respect. Another hidden factor is internal permission. Weak communicators unconsciously wait for others to validate their voice before speaking confidently. Elite communicators give themselves permission internally. They do not psychologically ask the room whether they deserve space. They assume their contribution matters. That assumption changes tone, pacing, posture, and delivery automatically. Another reason executive communication sounds expensive is because it reflects emotional maturity. Emotional adults communicate differently than emotional children. Children react instantly. Adults regulate first. Children seek validation constantly. Adults focus on clarity. Children personalize disagreement. Adults analyze disagreement. Executive communication is emotional adulthood expressed through speech. Another communication principle CEOs understand deeply is this: people may forget exact words, but they never forget emotional experience. They remember how you made them feel during pressure, how stable you sounded during uncertainty, how calm you remained during conflict, how clearly you communicated direction when others became emotional. That emotional memory becomes your reputation. And reputation is one of the most valuable currencies in the world.